Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Hope you guys are doing absolutely phenomenal. This is Yasin here, and in today's podcast episode, I have a very, very, very special guest. It's my good friend, Sharif.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Hope you guys are doing well out there.
And today's episode, this is a very strange episode because first off, it took us like an hour to set up our setup. And so Sharif was visiting me and we're like, yo, let's record a podcast. It's going to be awesome. First time recording a podcast together. We said, you know what? We're in person. Why don't we record in person? And so we have the most janky, craziest setup ever. We're literally sitting next to each other. Two computers.
The crazy thing is that the hour setup didn't even involve or calculate the amount of time that we needed to spend on fixing the fire alarm because that thing was beeping nonstop. And between two of us, we finally figured out how to replace the battery and get the beeping to stop. So it's been an adventurous Friday, to say the least.
Get this out to you guys. To get this, hopefully some valuable gold nuggets.
Inshallah,
I'll let you guys be the determining audience of what it is that we're going to talk about here. But really, the topic that Sharif and I had that we've been talking about all afternoon is, I feel, a very important one to document because it's a topic that Sharif and I in private sessions have been talking about a lot over a lot of years, which is really the impact that we want to have on the generation. So Sharif, maybe you want to kind of give a preface on, not to mention, we got the gummies because we worked hard on getting them in the shot, so I hope you guys appreciate it.
It's the pop of color, right?
There we go.
To this white backdrop. But yeah, no, alhamdulillah, like Yasin mentioned, we've been talking about a lot of this stuff in private for, I guess, over the past few years now. And at a high level, this topic is kind of personally, has been my why for a lot of my choices in my life and the direction that I'm trying to get toward, travel down and get to, inshallah. And basically what we're talking about is legacy. That's kind of tied into a paradigm shift and kind of changing the narrative for what it means to be a practicing conservative Muslim. And I hate titles, I hate that word, but it's the word that gets thrown around a lot to kind of maybe better capture what we're trying to talk about here. And with that being said, like Yasin mentions, a lot of our parents, they've done the best they can, and we don't take anything away from that. Their sweat equity, what they've done migrating to a foreign country without anything or anybody is nothing short of amazing. I don't know if I could do it, to be honest with you, but with that being said, they've been very risk averse, right? And that's led to basically, hey, get a job, stick to that job, and practice Islam, and this is how you practice it. And there's always been like this huge gap, right, between deen and dunya. And a lot of times what we've found nowadays is that people in our generation, we're talking about that middle ground, right? Finding that balance between deen and dunya. And in my personal exploration and experience, I found that, well, at least where I'm at right now, is that there really is no separation, right? There isn't deen and dunya, right? It's just all deen. And that is kind of, you get there with perspective, within with experience, right? So why can't, and yes, I'm sure you guys who know Yasin have been listening to him for a while now who know, he loves to say this and I agree with him. Why can't a practicing Muslim be a millionaire, right? And all this is a long-winded way of coming back to and really shedding light on this paradigm shift, right? Because a lot of us have this understanding of what a practicing Muslim looks like, what he sounds like, what he dresses like, what are his interests, and this idea of like zuhud, or lack of attachment for the dunya, right? Yasin, that's right, zuhud, right?
Yeah,
right? This lack of attachment to the dunya and this modesty and non-materialistic point of view, and all these things are definitely very important. But I feel like the misunderstanding is that in order to be practicing and in order to manifest these elements of our deen and to increase our spirituality, we cannot be successful. We cannot obtain wealth in this dunya. But what we've discussed is, no, there are examples in the Sahaba, right, who they were extremely successful financially, but they obtained their success, they obtained their wealth with the niyyah, with the intention of doing it fi sabilillah, right, to strengthen the ummah, to give dawah, right, to help the people. And we are essentially trying to do that, and that's kind of a lot of our why now, right? Because I feel like especially in our generation and the generations behind us, the younger ones, people are kind of at this fork in the road, right? Where they're like, okay, I either become practicing and I don't have any real success, financial success or wealth in this life, or I go the other way, right? Where I have to kind of maybe compromise some of my religiosity, some of my spirituality to obtain this success in this life. We all know the famous English saying from a pop star, right? I drove by the fork in the road and I went straight. Maybe not all of us, but some of us know that.
I never heard that before.
It's cool. It's better if you don't know it, right? But nonetheless, but yeah. So we're trying to show you there's another way, inshallah, right? And we're going through it. We're trying to be successful in it. That's the paradigm shift that we're working towards. And inshallah, we hope to at least, if not be fully successful in it, at least shed light to it so that moving forward, people behind us can start to think that way, inshallah, and obtain success in dunya and get some wealth and also kind of do it in a way fi sabilillah and for the betterment of the ummah and to further enhance the cause of this deen.
There you guys go. You see, this is why I bring Sharif on the podcast, because mashallah, usually I'm the one who is many times overtaking the conversation, but the reason Sharif and I get along really, really, really well is because of the fact that him and I are oftentimes on the same wavelength because of a lot of topics. But to give a little bit more context in this so that way it's not as abstract, the specific example that Sharif and I were talking about was related to the idea of Sharif has a friend of his who is extremely successful. He runs a massive organization. I think it's upwards of $100 million a year.
Yeah.
And so the conversation we were having was, for me, my biggest why for the longest time has always been related to if I can change. So other people who might build a business, other people who might become successful, they get their dream life, they make a lot of money, they get the cars that they want, they get the wives that they want, whatever, wives, multiple.
Whoa, brother, relax. We're trying to get one right now. We're trying to get one right now.
I don't want to be, I'm going to be beat up there for a second. But the point being is that, if they win at the game, they get their own dream life. Versus if we as Muslims win at the game, then for us, what's at stake is that we're changing the narrative, we are changing the game, we are breaking the 4-minute mile for the upcoming generation and for the children that are coming, right? It's for whether that be our children, our grandchildren, whatever that means, because me and Sharif also had the conversation that, neither of us know our mother tongues, unfortunately, well enough to be able to move back to our countries.
Right.
And so it doesn't look like there's a future where we're going to be moving back to our countries of our parents. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, how do we then plan in a way that is, the generational aspect of living in this country? And it means really be able to changing our beliefs, our ideas about what is actually possible. And it's only going to happen when there are individuals in our bloodlines who we can look back and say, oh, that person was the catalyst for me creating that change. And so for me, so we could talk a little bit more about that, but then we can also go into, it's not only about winning at the game, but then it's also about winning at the game so that way you're above water. Because the conversation we were having earlier was the friend that Sharif has, he is, mashallah, really, 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 really successful. For a Muslim to run $100 million plus company, I've not heard of many. Mashallah, right? However, there are certain things that maybe aren't the best in terms of being above water, right? Is that what we're talking about, Sharif?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to speak, definitively on that person or their experiences, but at least from my point of view, from what little bit I do know of, there were certain instances and stories that I didn't feel comfortable hearing about or being exposed to, right? As far as like how to go about acquiring business and contracts and so on and so forth, right? So
right, exactly.
Yeah.
So it's like not only are you supposed to win at the game, but it's also very important that you win in a way that can be exemplary to the other generations.
Well, Yasin, if I may, I think for me personally, I think if you're not above water, you haven't really won.
That's a fair point.
Right, because we're not playing this game, right? We're playing a different game.
Right, yeah.
Right, so in our game, essentially, for lack of a better analogy, we're not winning, right? If we're below water, so to speak. And for For anyone who's not following, for us below water, we're saying if you're doing anything that's potentially displeasing to Allah,
Shady business.
Shady business,
Gray
right?
area.
Yeah, gray areas. Trying to avoid the gray areas. Trying to avoid shady business. Whatever this interest, lying, backhandedness, whatever the situation may be. That's kind of what we're referring to as being above and below water right here.
Yeah.
So
it's kind of like so. I think first we can go into the topic of this whole game of actually changing the generations by winning the game, right? Changing the narrative, because that's a conversation that you and I had about. What does it mean for our children if all of a sudden, like you might be able to comment a little bit on how you started doing some deen studies and how that kind of created an example and a ripple effect for other people in your family. So maybe if you want to kind of dive into that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, to kind of backtrack just a little bit here, when Yassin had mentioned the notion of our mother tongues, right? That's kind of really how it really sparked this conversation, saying that like, it's kind of sad, and I admit that it is a little bit sad, right? That like nobody will be speaking my mother tongue. They might be familiar with it, but they may not be speaking it. If Allah blesses me with kids, in my kids, right? The probability is low, right? Especially if I marry somebody outside of my income, right?
Which, by the way, if you're future Sharif kids, if you're watching this, you might be able to comment in the section below and let us know. Do you speak? Do you speak the mother tongue or not? You can let us know in the comments below. Sharif's future children.
Oh man. Nonetheless, we digress. But yes, that's kind of how it started. And we were saying how that it's kind of sad, right? Because it's like that element of our legacy, of our parents and our family legacy is coming to an end, most likely, right? But the optimist in me says that, well, yeah, that legacy, sure, might be coming to an end. But we're working on, now that you guys understand this why and kind of the perspective we're coming from here, is that we're working on creating a new legacy, right? Because really, we're in uncharted waters here, right? Our legacy of our family ancestrally is different because they're coming from a different country, right? Generations, timelines, that's always going to be an element, new generations, different time periods, that's fine. But they're coming from a totally different country, totally different culture. That's why we're Gen 1, right? I'm Gen 1, Gen 2, you guys know how it goes. We're now in uncharted territory, right? We are the pioneers, so to speak, right? Like going down the Oregon Trail looking for gold here, right? But with that being said, we're trying to create a new legacy, right? And that legacy is to now try to be an example, like Yassin alluded to, of trying to be practicing Muslims, trying to do things above water to the best as we can, trying to earn the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also trying to be successful in a halal, in a kosher, in a clean-cut way, right? And doing so, it's like, what does that look like? Now, for me, Yassin mentioned, maybe going to study a little bit. So, alhamdulillah, I'm no alim, I'm no mufti or anything like that, but I'm trying right now my best. I have moved away from my mother state, my home state, to try to learn Arabic and so on, and other studies, so on and so forth. And bare minimum, whether I succeed or not in what I'm trying to acquire, I hope that inshallah that it can be used as kind of like a belief breaking, a paradigm breaking example for my lineage after me. So it's not foreign, to my children or to my nephews or to my cousins or whoever else that, hey, listen, you know what? Hey, this guy did it, right? Like, it can be done. Mashallah, he's acquired a certain level of success in this life with his work, with his business, and he hasn't totally left the deen. He's trying to be practicing, right? Alhamdulillah, like, this type of inspiration doesn't come from me. I know that. I'm just very grateful that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has utilized me as a medium to facilitate this a little bit, right? And I hope that He continues to utilize me in that fashion. But one of my younger cousins, he's mentioned now that he is taking part-time alim courses, but he's still continuing with the secular education and still continues his progressions towards getting a professional job. And I'm already seeing that, and and that's because it's not because, right? But we've also had conversations, he and I, about this entire perspective. And so I'm hoping that inshallah it continues. If I'm blessed with children, maybe it will continue with them. Like for example, like if somebody is like Hafiz al-Quran, like that's part of their legacy, right? That inshallah they try to instill that into their kids, and inshallah then it's like that legacy continues, right? So I think I can say that in my family's history that I know of, I'm the first to travel to go and try to seek Arabic or Islamic knowledge. In what capacity and how much I succeed, right?
Yeah.
That's different. But I think I'm the first, alhamdulillah, for that. And again, to what Yassin had mentioned, we're hoping to kind of be the first in a lot of ways to shatter the belief system a little bit, and,
Yeah, man,
and
absolutely.
be the starting point that people can use to jump off and take it to the next level.
And these are topics I legitimately get emotional sometimes thinking about, because one of the things that I had this thought years ago when I was in my early teens, which was that imagine on Yawm al-Qiyamah, and inshallah if we go to Jannah, there's some individual who somewhere in our bloodline accepted Islam, and I can't imagine the level of emotion that I would have to be able to meet that individual and tell him, hey, I don't know how many generations away you were, right? Obviously, in Yawm al-Qiyamah we might know like he was like 5 generations before or whatever. And you meet that individual and you tell him, hey, it's because you're a farmer, you're a businessman, I don't know what you were, but because you accepted Islam, you didn't know the level of consequence that had generations down the line. And yet, I mean, maybe hundreds of years later, I was born a Muslim because of this, maybe at the time you didn't take it as a big deal, maybe because your family became Muslim, or wallahu alam how Islam came to you in Pakistan, Punjab, whenever it was there, wherever my family is originally from. For me to be able to meet that individual and tell that individual, you don't understand the level of ni'mah and the blessing that I had for being able to be born a Muslim because of the decision that you made in your life. And so that's what Sharif is alluding to here, is that the decisions that we make in our life, like Sharif, if he's the first person in his family to go out there and seek ilm, what does that mean for his children, for his grandchildren, especially in a world where in the modern era everything is documented, we readily know what our parents have done in the past, right? Versus 100 years ago, you're talking about early 1900s. I mean, I asked my grandfather once, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him, he passed away a couple years ago. I asked him, like, how old are you? He's like, I think I'm like 85 or 95. I'm not sure which one it is. I'm either 85 or 95 years old. He's like, they never documented what my birthday was.
Yeah.
And so, especially in a time where, wallahu alam, if unless social media collapses, which, that's a whole nother topic about the benefits of social media and the internet. But wallahu alam, this podcast episode that we're recording, in and of itself stands as a testament of time to be able to say, hey, we were at this age, right? We were in our 20s, we were in our 30s, we were thinking about these topics, we were thinking about how to be able to make an impact on the next generation. That's one thing I want to mention. The second thing, and I think a lot of people, Sharif, you and I are familiar with the story about the 4-minute mile, but I feel like a lot of individuals out there may not be. So just FYI, I'll narrate this story because it's one of my favorite stories that illustrates the topic that we're talking about.
It's awesome,
here.
yeah.
It's about belief, okay? Yeah. And so there's a gentleman, his name was Roger Bannister. So let me kind of give you a backstory here. So from the history of time, you're talking about from the Roman Empire, from the Chinese Empire, everyone has always been trying to break the 4-minute mile.
The Egyptians too, man.
The Egyptians, there we go, bro. Can't forget the Egyptians. My Egyptian brother, don't forget you out there. And so for the history of time, individuals have been trying to see how fast can the human being move. And the benchmark for that was we want to be able to break the 4-minute mile. We want to be able to run a 1 mile in 4 minutes or under 4 minutes.
Yep.
And so nobody has been able to actually break that for, you're talking about hundreds and hundreds and hundreds, if not thousands of years. And so there was a gentleman, I think it was don't quote me on it, 1945, or it might be somewhere early 1900s, don't quote me on it. His name was Roger Bannister. And in the Olympics, he broke the 4-minute mile, okay? Remember, this is a milestone and a record that has never happened before. And people thought legitimately that the human being physiologically was not capable of running a sub 4-minute mile. Okay, so he broke it. Literally, the next year, somebody broke his record. Okay, literally every year since, the record has been continuously being broken. And now in today's time, there are high schoolers that run sub 4-minute miles. And literally the only shift that occurred, it wasn't that human beings all of a sudden evolved, again, that's a whole other topic, I'm not going into that. But it wasn't that, all of a sudden we became so much better. It was simply because of the fact that because somebody knew that it was possible, because somebody had done it, if there's somebody out there that has done it, therefore I can do it as well because I'm no inferior than that person maybe. And so that's the concept of belief. I'll let you jump in.
They broke that record again within the next year, right? So for all the cynics and all the doubters out there, you can't lean on the crutch of advanced athletics and science and better shoes and all that stuff, because it was only a year later right? Like,
Yep.
yeah, maybe if it was 20, 30, 40 years later, you might have an argument to stand on, right? But this happened only a year later, right? So I think that's really telling. It's a great example of this whole, belief system breaking
Yeah.
and paradigm shifts. And, Yasin and I, we've talked about this a lot privately. Our bar diagram, right? Our bar
Yeah.
triangle, right? The belief, the action, and the results, right? And you have like the kind of how they all feed into it. So in this scenario, people had a certain belief, right? But then someone took action, and the result changed the belief,
Yeah.
right? And it just kind of kept going that way in this triangle flow chart that one feeds into the other, right?
Absolutely.
And full circle. I mean, I hate to talk about shapes all day, triangles and circles, but full circle, that's essentially that's our why, right? Inshallah, we're striving for it, and we hope that there's some type of benefit in it, and we hope that Allah accepts and is pleased with it for sure. But that's what we're aspiring to do. We're aspiring to change the narrative, to change the belief of what a practicing air quotes.
You gotta get your air
Right,
quotes.
I gotta
in
get my
there,
air
bro.
quotes right.
Yeah.
As you guys haven't figured out by now, if you haven't, I don't like definitive statements of what it means to be practicing or conservative or all that. I think anyway, that's another conversation for another day. But what it means to be a practicing Muslim in the West, right? And how maybe the belief that a lot of us have been fed growing up isn't necessarily the belief, right? And we're trying to show there are other ways to do that. And
Yeah.
that's my why, man. I mean, that's kind of why I do what I do professionally, and what I'm trying to do, personally and also recreationally as well.
Bro, likewise. And I think there's a lot of topics that we could go off into this, but
Mhm.
obviously for time's sake, we're
Yeah.
going to probably cut it here. But a couple points just so that we have it documented for purposes of future.
Yeah.
We could go into the fact that it's a very interesting concept of how powerful the mind is, that just based off belief, you can do things that are in reality everybody would think that are literally impossible. Obviously, we're not talking about, a man jumping off the cliff and, flying or something like that. But we're talking about in terms of shaping reality based on what it is that you think is possible or what it is that you don't think is possible. And that is simply a change of mindset and a change of belief, right? And, we could go into the fact that I know Arif and Sharif, both who are brothers, some of my closest friends.
Shout out to my
Yeah,
brother.
there we go, Arif out there. Is, before they had a lot of interaction with me when I talk about business concepts, they really were coming from a background that they were never exposed to business concepts versus myself
Yep.
being exposed to, my father being an entrepreneur, my uncle being an entrepreneur. I was exposed to these concepts, so I had a different belief about what was possible, and that resulted in me being able to take different actions that came up with different results.
Yep.
And so just the exposure of the changing of belief has allowed Sharif and Arif and and their sister and the whole everybody to really have a different idea of business. So that's one concept that we could talk about in the future. The second thing, Sharif, that I know you and I are very passionate about
Yep.
is how does then your future spouse
Mhm.
and your marriage
Very important.
go into this concept of your why, and whether or not you marry the right person may or may not have an influence on whether or not you can actually achieve your why. And I know you have some super fiery thoughts about that. So that's the second point that I'm sure we can record multiple podcast episodes
Sure.
about these topics as well. Did you have any other things that maybe you want to document so that way you can remember next time?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, just to kind of add on a little bit to your first point, as far as sometimes we just need to see someone break that pre-existing belief, and that's what we're trying to do. Whether we're successful, I think worst case scenario, we don't shatter that belief, but we put a big crack in it.
Yep,
you
there we
know,
go.
and
Yep.
and let the generation behind us really take it down.
Yep.
Inshallah, right?
Inshallah.
Because it was only later in my development that I kind of picked up on this perspective.
Yep.
Right? So inshallah, if we can teach our children or the youth, anyone who's willing to listen, from a younger age, maybe they can shatter what we started.
Yeah,
inshallah, right?
absolutely.
So,
So yeah, we'll call it here before I finish this entire pack of pack of gummies.
They're
'cause
good,
I'm just-
man. They're good.
They're good. I'm
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
chewing. And the funny
Yeah.
thing is that they're on my side because we have to get them in the shot here. So you haven't been able to take advantage of any of the gummies on this end.
And they are halal gummy bears before anybody asks.
There we go.
right,
Before
right.
the halal police comes on
Yeah,
us,
I know, right?
specifically went to the halal store to
Yeah.
get these today. A special halal store here in
Yeah.
Dallas, by the way.
Shout out to Greenvine Market.
There we
Check it
go.
out for you local people.
Sponsorship, please.
Free vlog. We got no sponsorship.
No sponsorship.
We're looking for it.
Absolutely, inshallah. And obviously, if there is some issues with the technology here, if the audios are a little bit delayed, if there's any issues, please forgive us. We're just trying to get this content out there. We just said, hey, done is better than perfect.
Yep.
We had no idea how we were going to do it. We said, you know what, let's just do it.
Total ad hoc, man.
Totally. I mean, we're literally sitting next to each other, guys. Like, we're literally...
Don't reveal the magic, Yasin. All right? Let the wizard stay behind the curtain,
Bro,
right? It's like,
two computers, two gentlemen sitting right next to each other. If somebody walked into this room right now, they would say the next generation has completely lost their mind. They cannot even have in-person conversations
while being next
to each other. But inshallah, we'll leave it off of that. And inshallah, hopefully, if you guys like Sharif on the podcast, please be sure to let us know, because I'm going to try to encourage him to come on as often as possible. And so please be sure to let us know, give us a lot of feedback on that. And if there's anything that, obviously we said that you guys disagree with, let us know as well, because we're always open to adapting, growing, changing what it is that we think as well. And Sharif, unless you have any other thoughts you want to add on here?
Like, subscribe, comment on my man's YouTube page, right? Let's get this thing going for him, inshallah. And that's it, man. Thank you for listening. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.